Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to your Valentine's Views podcast for Monday, December 23rd, January 23rd. Excuse me. The This is the first podcast of the Giants 2023 off season, and here to help me a little bit of a post mortem and some thoughts on Saturday's divisional round loss to the Philadelphia Eagles is Big Blue Views Tony Del Genio. Tony, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine under the circumstances.
Yeah, hopefully my tongue seems to be all twisted up this morning. Hopefully that improves as the day goes along here, but so be it. We'll muddle through. We'll do the best we can here. Tony, I want to start with this quickly. I wrote this in a couple places, and I look at Saturday. Brian Dable referred to it as a crash landing. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't competitive. And it was a disappointment that the Giants couldn't push the Eagles harder, maybe couldn't pull off the upset. But in no way, shape, or form do I think that Giants fans can be disappointed in the season that the Giants had.
No, I think if you're going to be realistic about it, you have to go back to this time a year ago when things were in a shambles and we were only about at the point where the Giants were starting to put things back together by hiring Joe Shane and then Brian Dable. And there was a little optimism then, but no one realistically thought the Giants would even have a winning record this year, much less get into the playoffs and win a game in the playoffs against a team that was a division champion. All right. I mean, everybody disses the Vikings now, but it's not that the Vikings were a bad team. The Vikings were a good team. They're just not the best. And the Giants beat them. And so, for 1 year, given a roster that seemed to be so devoid of talent, I think it's amazing what the Giants did this year.
Absolutely. You have to keep everything in perspective. This is a team that was 4-13 a year ago. This is a team that was an embarrassment, a laughing stock, subject of memes all over the place. Team that had lost double-digit games 5 years in a row. Even Joe Shane and Brian Daboll sort of tamped down expectations when things began. Shane was very upfront about the issues that the Giants had with the salary cap, about the things that he couldn't do that he wanted to do. He was very upfront that he couldn't chase the caliber of free agents that he really wanted to chase because his hands were tied financially. You look at the roster and he knew what he had. He knew he had some young players to work with, but that there was a lot to be done. There's still a lot to be done. And he said, we're just going to make it the best that we can. I don't think anyone thought that the best that the Giants would do would be to get to the final eight, would be to get to this point where they won a playoff game and generated this much excitement in the fan base for the first time in quite a while. So I think, heck of an accomplishment for those guys in their first year.
Oh, absolutely. And and you look around the league, there are all but four teams right now that are pretty disappointed with how their 2022 seasons went. I mean, you look at the Buffalo Bills, for example, who had Super Bowl aspirations, and not only are they not getting to the Super Bowl, but I mean they were drummed out pretty decisively yesterday by Cincinnati, and that's a team that was kind of a Super Bowl favorite. And so, you look at other teams around the league, and the Giants outperformed expectations by more than any other team in the NFL did.
Absolutely, Tony. And I think this is another thing that I've written at Big Blue View, and I want to see if see what your thoughts are on this. I hate to keep saying, well, you have to point at the Eagles and you have to model yourself after the Eagles, because that's not necessarily what I'm trying to say. But I think that the two games against the Eagles, week 14 when the Giants were drubbed 48-22, and then Saturday night again 38-7 game that really wasn't competitive. I think those two games to me really highlighted just how far the Giants have to go to, they're a good team, but how far they really have to go to be a championship caliber contender, to be a team that belongs in the Final Four, to be a team that can be looked at as a legitimate Super Bowl threat. There's an obvious gap there. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Eagles are a tough comparison right now because, in my opinion, and I hate to say it, but the Eagles are a team to me that looks like they have no weaknesses, and I mean they're just stacked really across the board. And I mean, what do you say? Maybe their linebacker group isn't one of the top 5 in the NFL, but they're not a bad linebacker group. They're actually a pretty good linebacker group, but they've got a tremendous offensive line, tremendous defensive line. They've got 2 really good cornerbacks. They've got 2 really good wide receivers. And you go on and on and on, and at every position group along the way, they're stacked. And I think that they are a tough draw for any team. And I think San Francisco is going to find that out in a week. So, of course, they're getting old, some of them, especially along that offensive and defensive line. So that's not going to last forever for them. And like any other team, they'll have their ups and their downs over the coming years. But if you just throw them out for the minute and compare to the rest of the NFL, I think the Giants are in a position within a year, maybe 2 years, of being able to compete with almost any other team in the NFL if they do things right and get a little luck coming their way.
Absolutely. The other thing I was thinking is you watch the divisional round game on Sunday night between the 49ers and the Cowboys. And when you watch those two teams and you watch what the Eagles did to the Giants, it's clear that, as I said, the Giants are a good team, but it's clear that for me, it's not even necessarily that there's more top to bottom talent, but for me, what there are is there's more speed and there are more actual playmakers, more difference makers on the rosters of those teams. And for me, that's what it is with the Giants. I don't know if you've read it yet, but I did sort of my look at the 5 biggest areas of need for the Giants heading into the offseason. I did that Monday morning. And for me, what it comes down to is both lines and difference makers, both lines and difference makers at the skill positions.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think the Eagles are showing everyone. I'd argue that San Francisco and Dallas pretty much also show you that the offensive and defensive lines are just so important to really go far in the playoffs. And the Giants clearly are not there. I mean, I think they're farther along on the defensive line than any place else. I still think that there are 1, maybe 2 pieces on the defensive line that they might consider adding, like an IDL to come in. You notice versus the Eagles that as soon as the Giants rested Dexter Lawrence for a few plays, the Eagles immediately ran the ball and had success, doing it. And given Azeez Ojulari's injury problems, not clear that they don't actually need some more depth at the edge position also. But the defensive line is in relatively good shape. Clearly, the offensive line still needs a lot of work. You can say that there are potential pieces there, but other than Andrew Thomas, there are no definite pieces there yet. And the offensive line just got steamrolled once again by the Eagles, as it is every time they play the Eagles, it seems. And there's so much work to be done there still.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about both of those areas. I want to talk defensive line first, and we'll include the edge players. I didn't actually write about the edge players in the piece that I did this morning, But I think I would argue, I think as you would, that while you've got Kayvon Thibodeau and Azeez Ojulari, and while you've got Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence, that's not enough, because what the Eagles show you, and again, we're back to, hey, we're talking about Philadelphia's roster again, but I think that what the Eagles and other teams show you, 49ers are this way, I think, as well, is that they can bring defensive front 7 players or front 4 players. They bring them in waves.
Mm-hmm.
And the talent, maybe it drops off a little bit, but it doesn't drop off a whole heck of a lot. And I mean, no offense to Tomon Fox, but he's an undrafted free agent rookie. No offense to Jihad Ward. He's a terrific locker room presence, but Jihad Ward is a journeyman who bounces from team to team for a reason. He's not a true impact player. Guys like Justin Ellis. Justin Ellis is a great guy. I've talked to him a million times in the Giants locker room, but these guys, they're not holding up their end of the bargain when the Giants have to rest people, and it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And on the defensive line, you do have to rest people. You can't just have starters in there, because none of those guys plays 100% of the snaps. And so when you take them out and the talent level drops off so much, then smart teams will recognize that and immediately attack it. And that can be the difference in a close game. I'm not saying that was the difference on Saturday night, because the contrast between the two teams was so stark, but in other situations where the Giants are more competitive, being able to bring in someone who's pretty good to replace the guy that you have on the starting line that's superior is such an important thing. And again, as you say, not to come back to the Eagles, but the Eagles can do that. The Eagles can take their defensive linemen out and bring in other defensive linemen. I mean, they have their first round draft pick, Jordan Davis, who clogs the middle, and the guy only plays like 15 to 20 snaps a game. He's not even starting, but when he comes in, good luck trying to run on him, right? And so the Giants don't have that behind their frontline players on the defensive line.
Absolutely. And on the offensive line, the interior of the offensive line, I referred to it this morning as a mishmash, and there's a lot of decisions to be made there. But before we even talk about that, I need to more or less put down my marker here on Evan Neal. All right. I'm getting tired of people screaming that Evan Neal is a bust. I'm getting tired of people screaming that he has to be moved to guard. I'm getting tired of people comparing him to Eric Flowers. All right. First of all, Evan Neal is not Eric Flowers. Eric Flowers was a guy that had no friends in the Giants locker room. He had no interest in having friends. He had no interest in working hard, and had no interest in really improving his craft. Mm-hmm. Evan Neal is a very serious, very athletic young man who very badly wants to do this very well. And he's also a guy who, another difference between Evan Neal and Eric Flowers is every time Evan Neal has struggled this year, he stood in front of his locker, or he sat in front of his locker, and he took accountability for it. When Eric Flowers would struggle, he would refuse to speak to media and would leave his teammates to speak for him. All right. And that's a huge difference in accountability and professionalism. And I look at Evan Neal. Let's just be realistic. The Giants used the 7th overall pick in the NFL draft on Evan Neal. They used that pick because they think he can be a bookend to Andrew Thomas on the right side of their offensive line. They are not going to give up on that after one up and down season. They are going to give the young man a chance to go and work on his craft and get better and come back next season and do what young players do: develop and get better. So I'm just tired of that. I'm tired of the whole discussion.
Yeah, and the shame about Evan Neal was the injury he had mid-season, because he was starting to put together a couple of good games just before he got injured, and really since he came back, he's had a lot of problems. And you have to wonder, first of all, whether that knee is fully healthy, or whether he was just kind of getting by with it, and that it's not really going to heal up until he has this off season to rest. But that's a shame too. But as you say, offensive linemen don't always look great when they first come out of college. And uh, I suspect that with him, there's one or two problems that once he gets them fixed up, everything all of a sudden is going to look fine with him. And my guess is that it's not going to be a gradual improvement that you'll see from him. It'll just be something that he gets fixed, that allows him to kind of react better at the snap, or handle the outside speed better, or whatever it is that he needs to do. And once he does that, all of a sudden things are going to improve dramatically. That's my guess.
Yeah, and the only other thing I will say about Evan Neal is something that he pointed out on Sunday as Giants players were packing up to head off for the offseason. He has not played the same position on the offensive line 2 years in a row since high school.
Yeah.
And that, yes, he has a lot of flexibility, but that's a lot to ask. A guy to move left to right, inside to outside, back and forth. That's a lot to ask of a guy to move, change positions every single year for 4 or 5 straight years. I think that Evan Neal will benefit tremendously from going into an off season, knowing he will be the right tackle, and being able to go to Duke Manyweather of Offensive Line Masterminds, who is his primary offseason trainer, to be able to go there, break down some film, look at it, and work specifically at being a right tackle.
Yeah. And if you follow Duke Manyweather on Twitter, he gets asked about Evan Neal, and his response is that he's going to be fine. And like he's got no concerns about him. And the parallel to Andrew Thomas is not quite the same, because Andrew Thomas had a very chaotic coaching situation in his first year that I think retarded his development, in addition to the injury that he had actually for a couple of years. But you look even at the difference between Andrew Thomas last year and this year, and it's pretty significant. Also, Andrew Thomas had a very good second year in the NFL, but if you look at his third year, he's now being talked about among the top 3 or so, or top 4 or so offensive tackles in the NFL. And so he made another jump in his third year after making a big jump in his second year. So guys do develop. And you'll remember one of the first things you let me publish on the front page of Big Blue View was a thing I did a while back, looking at historically at offensive linemen's careers in the NFL, and asking, do they improve with time? And there are actually quite a significant number of offensive linemen who are not great in their first year or first couple of years, and then became great. Trent Williams is the best example that you can have of that. Guy's maybe the best offensive tackle in the league right now. At least the league thinks so. I think he's all pro, but he wasn't good as a rookie either. And all of a sudden he became a lot better. Well, what happened to Trent Williams? I don't know. I don't really follow his career, but something happened that all of a sudden he turned into a good offensive lineman, and now he's the best in the NFL. So it happens, and it happens to quite a few offensive linemen.
Absolutely. And Tony, let's talk a little bit about the interior of the offensive line. And the only thing that I think I know for sure right now about the interior of the offensive line, the 2 guard positions and the center position, the only thing that I really strongly believe is that Mark Glowinski's going to be back next season. Glowinski signed a 3-year contract with the Giants. There's still guaranteed money left on that deal. I think the dead cap money to cut Mark Glowinski is more than $8 million if the Giants were to do that this offseason, and I just don't see it. Plus the fact that while Glowinski is easy to pick on because occasionally his pass protection breaks down, he's not a bad player. He is an adequate to maybe slightly above average starting right guard in the NFL. I mean, my question really is what happens at the other two positions. John Feliciano is a free agent. Nick Gates is a free agent. Ben Bredesen's a guy who played fairly well, but just from the fact that the Giants continue to rotate him with Nick Gates, you wonder if they fully believe in him.
Mhm.
They drafted two guards last offseason in Josh Azudu and Marcus McKethan, and McKethan missed the whole year. Azudu missed much of it, and you wonder what they think of those guys. And it's a mishmash in there, and to me, I think whether you find it early in the draft, to me, you need at least one guy in that group who's a top tier anchor. I'd love for that to be at center, but to me, you need at least one guy in that group who's a top tier player.
Yeah, and so that's, I think, one of the well, it's more than one of the positions because you're talking about both guard and center that you might look at in the draft because you can usually get good interior offensive linemen after day one. You don't necessarily have to, especially in the IOL. I don't think you need to go after them on day one. And the Giants have other fish to fry on day one, I believe. But you can get someone in round two, round three, sometimes even round four. I mean, offensive linemen you can kind of get anywhere, and you never know how they're going to do in the NFL. But I'm sure the Giants are going to draft at least one offensive lineman, if not more than one. With 11 picks, I'd be very surprised to see them draft at least a center and an IOL. Plus, now this year, unlike last year, they've got cap space that they potentially can use depending on what they do with a couple of their existing contracts, especially. And so there might be a reasonably priced interior offensive lineman out there that they can get.
Absolutely. And the other thing, when I did my 5 areas of need, other positions that I mentioned were linebacker, cornerback, wide receiver, tight end. I didn't talk about it, but you could even throw in, kick and punt returner if you wanted to. What it really comes down to for me, at any of those positions is when you look at some of these other teams, when you look at the teams we've talked about, when you look at the Cincinnati Bengals, when you look at even the Bills who just got bounced out, you look at the Chiefs, what it comes down to is at those at so many of those positions, what the Giants don't have are enough players who can change games.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike Kafka did a great job this year scheming wide receivers open. But do the Giants have a wide receiver or a tight end who can actually get himself open and can actually make a play in traffic on his own? Do they have a cornerback who changes a game? No. I mean, I love Adoree Jackson. Adoree Jackson's a terrific cover guy. But you look at Adoree Jackson's history. Adoree Jackson has 3 interceptions in 88 NFL games, and he hasn't had double-digit pass breakups since 2018. He doesn't change games. Nobody in the Giants secondary really changes games. Nobody in that linebacker core changes games, at least not for the better.
I was about to
And
contradict you and say, oh, I thought their linebackers did change games a lot, but in the
yeah,
wrong direction.
yeah, but in the exactly in the wrong
Yeah.
direction, and that is what the Giants need are more guys in those positions who change games.
Yeah. Yeah. And linebacker, I agree with you about cornerback, and I suppose they could try to go for a cornerback in free agency. Cornerbacks tend to be one of those positions in free agency that you have to overpay to get a really good one. And so I'm kind of hoping that the Giants might deal with cornerback in the draft. I would be perfectly happy to see them use their first round draft pick on a cornerback if they find one of those game changers that you described there. I mean, obviously the Jets struck gold this season with Sauce Gardner. No one was surprised that they took him, but I don't think anyone could have anticipated what a great cornerback he would become just as a rookie. I mean, that's sort of the ideal situation. You can't hope to do that well, but there look to be a number of good cornerbacks available there that you might be able to get on day one, maybe even on day two. And I hope certainly by the end of day two at the latest, the Giants have selected a cornerback in the draft. Linebacker, is obviously the greatest need on the defense. You could argue that there is not a single linebacker on the Giants roster right now who is a really viable starting linebacker in the NFL.
Well, I made the argument on Monday morning, Tony. I made the argument that the only linebacker on the current roster who is guaranteed an opportunity to come back next season is Micah McFadden, and that is only because he'll be on the second year of his rookie contract.
Mm-hmm.
So you can make the argument that all of the rest of them who finished on the 53-man roster, not counting Darian Beavers, the 6th-round pick that missed the year with a knee injury, the rest of them are all free agents. I can see a scenario where the Giants don't offer contracts to any of them.
Yeah.
And just completely rebuild that position, because it's obvious that they've been searching for answers and really haven't found them and need to find them. But so we'll see. That's an interesting position. I did want to mention one thing. You mentioned Sauce Gardner. I still would love to know what the Giants would have done if Sauce Gardner and Kayvon Thibodeaux were both on the board when they selected. I believed then, and I believe now, that Wink Martindale's defense, because of his ability to scheme pressure and his love for the blitz and his ability to create what he always calls free rushers, because there's always free rushers in a Wink Martindale defense. I believed then, and I believe now, that his defense needs top-tier corners more than it needs top-tier edge rushers. And I think he would have picked I think the Giants would have picked Sauce Gardner given the choice, but we'll never know, and I'll always be curious.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think I feel exactly the same way about that. And I think Wink Martindale has actually said that.
Absolutely.
Not about Sauce Gardner in particular.
But he's absolutely said cornerbacks are so important to his defense.
His scheme. He said, I'll get guys to hit the quarterback. Mm-hmm. I just need guys to cover. And yeah, I think that's absolutely right. So I would be shocked. Yeah, of course, we don't know whether Wink Martindale is going to be back as the defensive coordinator next year, depending on how things go with the head coach interview process. All right, but assuming that he's back next year, I'd be really surprised if the Giants don't go get him a cornerback, because Adoree Jackson, as you say, he's a good corner. He's a very good cornerback, but he's not really a game changer. And to me, Adoree Jackson is a good CB2. And what the Giants need is a CB1. And really, and actually, at a lot of these positions that we're talking about, you say that the Giants need game changers, right? And that's what we're really talking about. They have good players who are being asked to be, CB1, wide receiver 1, and
tight end 1.
Mm-hmm. But they're really at the level of quality of CB2, wide receiver 2 or 3 or whatever, and so on. Mm-hmm. The Giants need ones at several of those positions, especially skill positions. That is, not on the line, not in the front 7, and so on and so forth. And that's what they don't have. They don't have that at cornerback. They don't have that at wide receiver, and so on.
Absolutely, Tony. We're a half an hour into this show, and I have to ask you this. A half an hour in, we have not talked about Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. Are you are you flabbergasted by the fact that we haven't gotten there yet?
Well, I figured it was gonna come up at some point. But I think that's an indication. I mean, obviously, the situations for both are uncertain, but I think the fact that we've got a half hour without talking about them reflects the fact that they're not perceived as the problems with this year's Giants team, right? And so obviously they are the highest priorities to deal with because they're two of the highest profile players. Uh, and you want to talk about game changers. Uh, Saquon Barkley. I mean, obviously, it's such a difficult situation because running backs have been somewhat devalued in the NFL in recent years. But if you want to talk about game changers, Saquon Barkley is the Giants' most obvious game changer that was on the roster this year. And the other thing I would say about Saquon Barkley is that he's kind of the one alpha, if you want to call it, on the Giants team. He's the one guy on the Giants team that really seems to be a thoroughbred. He's someone who looks the part and acts the part and plays the part of a guy who is one of the faces of the team and belongs there with the best players in the game. If you're thinking about Pro Bowls, All Pros, and things like that, Barkley is the only guy on the Giants who kind of has that vibe about him, and he's the only guy who's really capable of making game-breaking plays on the entire team. And so I understand that it's a difficult situation to re-sign him, and that the contract demands may not make it easy for them to pull something off. But I personally am hoping that they do that because I honestly think that if you just replace him with another back in the draft, which you can do in terms of the production, but I think you lose something in terms of the intangibles of the confidence that having a guy like him would bring to the offense. And so personally, I'm hoping for him to be back.
Absolutely. The only other name of a player that I thought about when you talked about an alpha is the guy who's becoming an alpha is Kayvon Thibodeau, but I think he needs more production to really back that up. But what I really want to do, Tony, I wanted to let you talk about Jones and Barkley first because I'm going to get back up on my soapbox. I'm going to get back up on my soapbox here. I don't know if you read the mailbag that I do every Saturday morning. I hope you do. I hope a lot of people out there read it. I get criticized all the time when I answer these mailbag questions. I get criticized all the time when I answer a question by saying that question really doesn't have an answer yet. Okay. Because generally speaking, I say that because I truly believe that certain questions can't be answered at the beginning of a season. They can't be answered until all of the evidence is in. They can't be answered in terms of whether a guy's a bust or not. They can't be answered until we've got 2 or 3 years worth of evidence to really see something. And where this applies to Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley is going all the way back to last off season. I was getting questions about, hey, Ed, put on your GM cap and tell us what you would do about re-signing Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. And the truth of the matter is that question didn't have a good answer last off season. That question didn't have a good answer 6 games into this season. That question didn't have a good answer even 8 weeks ago or 6 weeks ago. Now you can look at that question because now you have all of the evidence. Now you've got a full season with Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, and you can really answer that question. If I were to have answered that question last off season or at the beginning of this off season, you look at the franchise tag. And when I was asked that question, I said, look, right now, when you look at that, you can't pay Daniel Jones a $32.45 million franchise tag. If you're going to use the tag, you have to give it to Barkley. But Right now, the answer and the situation is the exact opposite. All right. It is going to, in my view, be much easier to get a contract done with Saquon Barkley than it is with Daniel Jones. All right. Saquon Barkley has said, he even said yesterday, I do not expect to reset the running back market. I understand that I missed 2 years basically with injuries. Said, I know where my value was headed and I know where it is now. He just wants a contract that's reasonable, that allows him to stay with the Giants. I think the Giants will be able to get that done. Every indication that you have, on the other hand, is that Daniel Jones' value begins at that $32.4 million franchise tag, and that he knows it. He absolutely knows it. He knows what Jared Goff makes. He knows what Dak Prescott makes. He knows what Kirk Cousins makes. He knows what his value is in relation to those guys. And he knows that he can probably get somewhere between 35 and 40 million dollars on an annual, on an average annual value, for a 3 or 4 year contract. He knows that. All right. So for me, that situation over the course of a year, as we've collected the evidence, that situation has flipped on its head. If you're going to use the franchise tag, you get a deal done with Saquon Barkley as quickly as you can, and then you save that franchise tag in the event that you can't come to a deal with Daniel Jones. And that's why I always say to people, certain questions can't be answered until we have all of the evidence, because the answer 6 months ago is vastly different because we didn't have the evidence.
Yeah, I agree with all of that too. I think that the situation with Daniel Jones right now is that, first of all, right, you look at Saturday night. Daniel Jones, I thought, played terrible on Saturday night. I mean, and he made a couple of really stupid plays, especially the play where he decided to go out of bounds rather than throw the ball away and make it difficult to pick up the first down on the next play. But you look at the week before, and Daniel Jones looked like the best quarterback in the NFL against Minnesota, right? And so, what that tells you is that yes, okay, there's a level of quarterback talent and effectiveness that you have to exceed in order to be worth a big contract. But what you saw against Minnesota is that if you give Daniel Jones at least a modicum of pass protection, and you're playing against a defense where receivers with modest ability are still able to be schemed open, then he can be a really, really effective quarterback. You put him in a game with no pass protection against cornerbacks who can stay glued to modestly talented wide receivers, and he can't do anything. And it's true of most quarterbacks in the game. You watch Josh Allen yesterday, and Josh Allen looked pretty awful yesterday.
Dak Prescott as well last night.
Pretty awful yesterday. Dak Prescott threw 2 interceptions, right? Is that right? Yeah.
I think
Josh Allen had Stephon Diggs storming out of the locker room after the game because he thought he wasn't getting the ball from Josh Allen enough. And so, even the best guys, if you don't give them the protection, if their receivers don't get open, will not look good out there. And there's not a quarterback for which that is not true. Even Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, and to me, Patrick Mahomes is hands down the best quarterback in the NFL. I don't see anyone better than him. But even in that Super Bowl against Tampa Bay a couple of years ago, they hounded him with the pass rush so much that even he was ineffective. There's not a quarterback that can do it without the other pieces there. And I think Daniel Jones has shown this year that with the protection, with the receivers getting open, he can do the job. And so, as you say, You got Jared Goff out there making 30 some odd $million a year. You got Kirk Cousins out there making 30 some odd $million a year. You got Ryan Tannehill, I think, making in the vicinity of $30 million a year. He absolutely is going to want a contract that starts at that level. And I think it's appropriate, given the way NFL contracts are going, that he get that. And if you want to start over again with a rookie quarterback, then again, you're rolling the dice, and you may find yourself back in quarterback hell, as Dave Gettleman used to call it. And I think the Giants are going to have to try to find something that works for both sides. But I agree, it's not necessarily going to be easy. Would have been a lot easier if they tried to do it in the offseason, but how could you give a 2-3 year contract to a guy that hadn't yet shown that he could do that?
Absolutely. The thing that I will say, to back up what you said, is I think what Jones showed you against the Minnesota Vikings is that the ability to be a quarterback who can win you games in big spots, that ability is within Daniel Jones. We didn't know if that was the case, but that ability is within him to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Saturday night, I got criticized when I did the kudos and wet willies because I didn't give Jones a wet willy, and I didn't give him a wet willy because I looked at the situation and I thought overall he really didn't have a chance to truly change the outcome of that game. That said, he missed a deep throw to Darius Slayton. He missed another short throw that probably would have gone for a first down. He did fumble a ball when he stayed in the pocket too long. And I think he stayed in the pocket too long because he was frustrated and the Giants were losing and nobody was open, and he knew he needed to try to make some sort of a play.
Yeah.
And yes, he made a really bad decision stepping out of bounds, turning 3rd and 3 in field goal range to 4th and 8 out of field goal range. And that proved really costly. So he didn't play well. But I think that what he has shown against Minnesota and throughout the year is that the ability to be the thing that I've been talking about, the ability to be a difference maker is within him.
Yeah, absolutely. And how many quarterbacks in the NFL are going to be able to do better? And I would argue at this point, there probably aren't even 10 quarterbacks in the NFL that clearly can be better than him. And again, even the best quarterbacks out there, you look at Aaron Rodgers, who no one would argue is not a Hall of Fame quarterback, right? I mean, he's one of the greatest of all time. But early in the season, when he had Devontae Adams gone and he had two rookie wide receivers who hadn't yet kind of adjusted to the NFL, Aaron Rodgers didn't look good for half the season, right? And so any quarterback is not going to look great without the players that he needs in front of him and running routes for him also being high quality. And so when you look at what Jones did this year with a still below average offensive line, especially on the interior and on the right side this year, and with the receivers that he had, it's amazing that he did as well as he did. And the other thing that people always forget, and I saw this on Twitter the other day, somebody criticizing someone praising Daniel Jones, saying, 3,200 yards and 15 touchdowns. You call that a great quarterback? And it's like, yeah, well, did you forget about the 700 yards rushing that he had this year? It's 3,900 yards of offense, not 3,200 yards. And did you forget about the quality of the players around him? And people always want to do that. And so I'm not claiming that he's going to be Mahomes or Burrow or even Josh Allen or even Justin Herbert. Okay, I don't know what height he can get to, but the guy just has not had a chance to work with a good lineup in front of him. And this year he showed that even with a modest lineup in front of him, he can be a pretty successful quarterback.
Absolutely, Tony. So I think that we've hit enough topics for today. I think it's going to certainly be a really interesting and unfortunately really long off season. But
Well, I was thinking though that it's not such a long off season because this year the Giants off season only began late Saturday night, and we're already more than halfway through January, and so we're delaying thinking about about the next season for quite a while. And I said, oh, it's really only like kind of 6 weeks before free agency gets started and things like that. And in previous years, we were in early December while the season was still going on, and we were already thinking about next year. So this doesn't seem so long to me.
well, that's a good point, Tony. That's a good point. That's the glass half full way to look at it. So let's look at it that way. All right. I think we'll call it a show at that point. Tony, thank you very, very much as always. Giants fans, thank you for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.